Hello there and good afternoon. This is L24 News, streaming live from Algiers, and coming up next in our news program. Kazakhstan's President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, who requested help from Russia last week after claiming the protests were coup d'etat, said on Tuesday that Moscow-led military mission was complete and contingent would leave the country within 10 days. US and Russian officials have had over 7 hours to talk Monday, but the two sides did not negotiate or appear any closer to resolution over heightened fears that Russia will attack in the neighboring Ukraine. The United Nations said Tuesday it needed $5 billion in aid for Afghanistan in 2022 to avert humanitarian catastrophe and offers ravaged country a future after 40 years of suffering. US hospitalization break record as Omicron surge. US ensures must cover 8 at-home tests each month. The Biden administration says Chicago's public schools canceled Monday's classes. Hello again and welcome. Those were today's headlines. And before entering the news bulletin, it is worth mentioning to remind you, our dear viewers, that the Algerian football team is playing now the first game in the AFCON 2022 in Cameroon in Group E against Sierra Leone. And the second game of the same group starts at 5 p.m. between Equatorial Guinea and Ivory Coast. Now, coming up to our news, Kazakhstan President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev told parliamentary today that the Russia-led Collective Security Treaty Organization military bloc will start withdrawing its troops from Kazakhstan in 2 days. This comes after nearly a week of unrest, by far the worst violence in the 30 years independent history of the former Soviet state. Usama Yadi.
Kazakhstan authorities said on Sunday they had stabilized the situation across the country after the deadliest outbreak of violence in 30 years of independence, and troops from Russia-led military alliance were guarding strategic facilities. Security and intelligence officials briefed President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev that they were continuing cleanup actions in what he called a huge counter-terrorism operation across the oil-producing former Soviet Republic.
Unfortunately, it came with a huge price. The loss of security forces and civilians. 16 members of the security forces were killed and more than 1,300 injured regrettably. We have civilian casualties. The final number is still being calculated.
Kazakh President Kassym Tokayev requested help from the Russian government last week, considering the protests to be a coup. Tokayev stated that the Russian-led military troops which arrived for stabilizing the situation in the country successfully completed their mission, and the troops would leave the country within 2 days. According to the Interior Ministry of Kazakhstan, security forces detained 9,900 people regarding last week's unrest. The news comes as the president, who called the violence a coup attempt, is set to nominate a new prime minister in an address to parliament later in the day.
We prevented dangerous threats for the country's security as part of the terrorist mission. We are trying to find these people who committed these crimes. We detained around 8,000 people. And law enforcement officers and special departments are checking their involvement in terrorist acts.
The oil-rich former Soviet Republic says government buildings were attacked in several major cities after initially peaceful protests against hikes in the price of car fuel turned violent. Tokayev has said Islamist militants from regional nations and Afghanistan as well as the Middle East were among the attackers. He dismissed cabinet amid the unrest along with a number of security officials and detained on suspicion of treason the most senior among them, Karim Masimov, a former head of the National Security Committee.
Russia and the United States gave no sign that they had narrowed their differences on Ukraine and European security in talks in Geneva, as Moscow repeated demands that Washington said it cannot accept it.
after Russia and US finally held talks in Geneva, in which they discussed the escalating tensions since fears of invasion sparked amid Russia's deployment of tens of thousands of troops to the Ukrainian border, as well as a discussion about the security guarantees of Europe. The talks were postponed as the two sides said that they failed to narrow their differences.
Okay, shall we sit down?
Negotiators still remained at odds over Moscow's demands that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the post-war military alliance of Western power, halt its expansion in Europe, and the US insisted that Russia remove its troops arrayed near Ukrainian borders. The troop buildup has prompted concerns that Russian President Vladimir Putin intends to invade Ukraine. However, Deputy Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov insisted that Russia has no such intentions.
Were a deal breaker one way or another is envisioned. Unfortunately, we have a great disparity in our principled approaches to this. US and Russia in some ways have opposite views on what needs to be done.
Ryabkov repeated demands including a ban on further NATO expansion and an end to the alliance's activity in the Central and Eastern European countries. Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman, who led Washington's side, emphasized the firmness of the U.S. concerning the demands in which they describe it as impossible. A progress was expected in Geneva's talks, however, the two sides had different goals. The U.S. hoped to ease tensions over Ukraine. Meanwhile, Russia aims to remark the post-Cold War security arrangements in Europe.
In the same line of thought, U.S. envoy to UN Linda Thomas-Greenfield made remarks on the situation of Russia and Ukraine by saying that the U.S. has been watching closely the build-up of the Russian troops on Ukraine's borders. She added that it remains their goal to find diplomatic way forward and avert conflicts, and that President Joe Biden has instructed them to work intensively and pragmatically to determine if that is possible.
We have been watching closely the buildup of Russian troops on Ukraine's border. The United States has been preparing diligently in close consultation with our partners and allies options based upon the path Russia chooses to take in the weeks ahead. It remains our goal to find a diplomatic way forward and avert conflict, and President Biden has instructed our diplomats to work intensively and pragmatically, including here in New York, to determine whether that is possible.
According to South Korea's military statement, North Korea on Tuesday launched what it appeared to be a ballistic missile more capable than the hypersonic missile. It launched less than a week ago. The early morning launch came as the UN Security Council finished discussion in New York on how to respond to Pyongyang's reported testing of suspected hypersonic weapon last week. Seoul said that South Korea and US militaries were analyzing the launch in a greater deal. The United Nations and partners launched a more than $5 billion funding appeal for Afghanistan to help 22 million people in urgent need. Afghans are facing one of the world's most rapidly growing humanitarian crises as a result of the Taliban control over the 4 decades conflict and endemic poverty. UN Aid Chief Martin Griffiths said that this message is urgent about Afghanistan.
Today we are launching an appeal for $4.4 billion for Afghanistan itself for 2022. This is the largest ever appeal for a single country for humanitarian assistance. Humanitarian agencies within Afghanistan can only operate if there's cash in the economy which can be used to pay officials, salaries, costs.
A third city in China has been locked down because of the coronavirus outbreak, raising the number confined to their homes of the country to about 20 million people. The lockdown in Hainan City, home to 5.5 million, followed the confirmation of 2 cases of Omicron Monday that are believed to be linked to the 2 other cases found Saturday in the city of Tianjin. The United States reported 1.35 million new coronavirus infections on Monday, the highest daily total for any country in the world, as the spread of the highly contagious Omicron variant showed no signs of slowing. The previous record was 1.03 million cases on January 3rd. A large number of cases are reported each Monday due to many states not reporting over the weekend. The 7-day average for new cases have tripled in 2 weeks to over 700,000 new infections a day. The president of Mexico, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, announced through his Twitter account that he is infected with COVID-19, so he will remain in isolation and will only communicate virtually. For his part, López Obrador mentioned that he had met with officials days before, although he assured that did not show any symptoms for his part. Pressure is intensifying on President Joe Biden to articulate a plan to enact meaningful voter protections as a counter-strict new voting law going into place around the nation after warning for the past years of emerging dangerous to democracy. Zara Ferjani on what follow.
U.S. President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, who asked Biden last year to take voting rights as her main theme, plan to lay a wreath in the crypt of Martin Luther King Jr. and visit the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church where the assassinated civil rights leader preached. The two measures, the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Advancement of Voting Rights Act, would jointly strengthen electoral protections by creating national standards for voting by mail and restoring some eliminated elements of voting rights. Biden's speech at the Atlanta University Center works to drive support behind the bills as they come before the Senate.
Without the right to vote, there is no democracy. We've supported Democrats fighting for voting rights bills since day one of our administration, making sure that we have unanimous support among Democrats in the Senate, which we do. But each and every time it gets to be brought up, the other team blocks the ability even to start to discuss it.
Democrats in Congress are preparing to promote the bills before this year's midterm elections, but with opposition from nearly all Republicans, the measure's only chance of success is altering the obstructionist rules of the Senate.
The Senate Democratic leaders are trying to use a big lie to bully and berate their own members into breaking their word, breaking the rules, and breaking the Senate. We're going to spend all week sounding the alarm on the radical takeovers that some Democrats want to pull off.
Activists and some of Biden's allies worry there is little hope of convincing the remaining resistant Democrats to opt for the rule changes, and they grow increasingly frustrated with Biden for not breaking the impasse.
World number one Novak Djokovic will be allowed to defend his title at the Australian Open in Melbourne after a judge quashed the government's decision to cancel his visa. The judge ordered Djokovic to be released from quarantine hotel from undocumented immigrants. However, Novak Djokovic is still facing deportation after Australian government warned the immigration minister was considering a recancellation of his visa. After Novak Djokovic was trapped in an immigration hotel in Melbourne for 4 nights until judge ordered his release, his story served as a stark reminder of Australia's mistreatment of refugees and asylum seekers who have been stuck in the country's immigration detention system for years. More than 3,000 asylum seekers and refugees have been forcibly relocated to offshore camps in Papua New Guinea and Nauru since July 2013, where they have suffered horrific abuse, brutal treatment, and medical neglect. The human cost of these terrible policies have been enormous. Schools in Uganda are reopened after nearly 2 years of shutdown. In one of the world's toughest lockdowns in the world, Uganda decided to close school in March 2020, following the spread of the coronavirus pandemic. More details with Nabil Khazini.
After nearly 2 years of shutdown because of COVID-19, Schools in Uganda are finally open to welcome children who have missed classes since March 2020 and in the world's longest school closure.
For us, we are ready to be here. We are going to learn. We are serious. And so far, we are going to do everything as we want.
During the period of lockdown, some pupils entered the child labor market to work in mining, street vending and agriculture, while others got married. Authorities warned that at least 30% of students may never return to school.
Started to lose power because everything we have seen, schooling is just sloping down, everything is going stagnant, and we need to look for a better way to live.
Some classes reopened temporarily in October 2020, but had to close their gates again in May and June of the following year.
I hope that this time there is no closure again. Let us manage these situations as they come, from schools, nearest health centers, and then life continues like that.
During the shutdown, some students had lessons via the radio, TV and newspapers. Some schools have provided printed materials, while wealthier Ugandans have also been able to access online classes and home tutors. However, it wasn't the case for everyone. Child rights groups had criticized Uganda's decision to keep schools fully or partially shuttered for 83 weeks, longer than anywhere else in the world. A decision that affected about 15 million students, according to the local government. Despite authorities instructing that health and safety measures like masks and social distancing should be in place, not all institutions have the space or facilities to ensure that these measures are properly followed. Some have huge numbers of students and very few classrooms.
Libyan security forces raided and violently broke up a siege protest by migrants outside a closed UN community center in the capital of Tripoli. The troops, which arrived at night, destroyed the protest site and arrested hundreds. Those arrested were sent to a detention center in the nearby town of Ain Zara, while others managed to flee from the raid, as they said. In Sudan, the United Nations hopes that the consultation will help lead to a resolution between anti-coup protesters and the military. The response from protest organizers and civil society leaders, however, has been lukewarm. Following the initial talks, the UN hopes to move to a second phase of facilitating direct or indirect negotiations between the different players. According to the UN, the military has not voiced any opposition to the talks. Protesters organized and civil society groups viewed the United Nations plans with caution, though one major protest organizer has already rejected the talks. President of the European Parliament and Italian Democrat David Sassoli passed away in hospital in Italy, where he was admitted in December, according to a spokesperson. The 65-year-old Italian was in a terrible health condition for more than 2 weeks due to the dysfunction of his immune system. A man with terminal heart disease is responding well 3 days after being given a genetically modified pig heart in a first-of-its-kind surgery. Surgery performed by a team at the University of Maryland Medicine in the United States is among the first to demonstrate the feasibility of a pig-to-human heart transplant, a field made possible by new gene editing tools. If proven successful, scientists hope pig organs could help alleviate shortage of donors' organs. Dr. Bartley Griffith, who surgically transplanted the pig heart into the patient, said in a statement, "This was a breakthrough surgery and brings us one step closer to solving the organ shortage crisis." Let's hear it.
He's awake. He is recovering and speaking to his caregivers, and we hope that the recovery that he is having now will continue. We've never done this in a human, and I like to think that we have given him a better option than what continuing his therapy would have been. But whether it's a day, week, month, year, I don't know.
A power outage may occur soon. Energy Minister Jimani Rokoj said that there is an uninterrupted power supply. However, the Ceylon Electricity Commission has received approval from the Sri Lanka Public Utility Commission for power outage, and authorities said it could be imposed at night due to the CEB power crisis because of the lack of the fuel at the power plants. Short power outages have been common over the past week. However, CPC supplied with 10,000 tons of blast furnace oil earlier this month to resolve the power crisis. More international news in this roundup by Nadia Kasmi.
Explosion in eastern Afghanistan near the border with Pakistan has killed at least 9 children and wounded 4 others. The blast of Monday took place when a cart selling food items struck on old and exploded mortar. Floods around South Africa's eastern coastal city of East London have killed at least 10 people and left hundreds homeless since the weekend as rivers burst their banks and roads were inundated. At least 22 people, including 10 children, have died in Pakistan's popular hill station Murree after heavy overnight snowfall caused traffic jams that trapped tourists in their vehicles, with many freezing to death. The last 7 years were the world's hottest on record, with the first analysis of global temperature in 2021 showing it was 1.2 Celsius above pre-industrial levels. The assessment of the year by the European Climate Agency, Copernicus, also found carbon dioxide in the atmosphere reached record levels and that the potent greenhouse gas methane surged very substantially, also to a new record.
It seems that the sanctions which were imposed on Mali's military government by the ECOWAS have increased tensions after the military junta announced the recall of ambassadors and closed borders with the West African nations. Islam Seed on what follow.
The government of Mali strongly condemns these illegal sanctions. This is how Mali's junta reacted to the decision after leaders of West African countries have rejected the transition announced by the military government in Mali and have decided to impose tough sanctions on the country. This act was unacceptable by Mali's military regime, who has announced the recall of ambassadors and the closure of air and land borders with West African countries, calling those sanctions as illegitimate. The meeting trailed months of growing tensions over the agenda for bringing back civilian rule in Mali after 2 military coups. It's worth noting that the ECOWAS and the West African Economic and Monetary Union imposed a series of economic and diplomatic sanctions against Mali on Sunday, including border closures and trade embargo. Mali's military ruler Assimi Goïta has said Bamako is open to talks after the 15-member West African Economic Union imposed additional sanctions on the troubled Sahel country over delayed elections.
We remain committed to a return to a normal, peaceful and secure constitutional order.
Mali's military junta accused ECOWAS and the UEMOA of being exploited by extra-regional powers with hidden motives, an apparent reference to Mali's partners engaged in military ways such as France in the Sahel region.
Deplores the inhuman nature of these measures which affect populations already severely affected by the security crisis and the health crisis.
The Malian government has stated that it will make every effort to ensure a normal supply for products to the public, but sanctions are certain to further stifle the economy in one of the world's poorest countries.
Foreign ministers from Gulf countries arrived in Beijing for a 5-day visit amid escalating events in the neighboring Kazakhstan, which raised concern about China's energy security. Officials from Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Oman and Bahrain, as well as Secretary General of the Gulf Cooperation Council, will stay in China until Friday, and they are expected to discuss energy ties with Beijing. More economic news in this roundup.
According to a study conducted by the Center for Economics and Business Research, absenteeism caused by COVID-19 isolation and staff shortages in the United Kingdom could result in a £35 billion loss, equivalent to 8.8% of gross domestic product (GDP) over January and February. This comes while Boris Johnson faced renewed pressure to act to get Britain back to normal. Turkey discarded a plan to use bonds to pay for banks' possible losses, a new way from the government to bolster the lira. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's ruling party voted to remove the clause on payments in bond instead of cash, according to Parliamentary Planning and Budget Committee. After the company announced the vaccine requirements in October, Citigroup will dismiss unvaccinated employees by the end of the month. The bank reminded its employees that they must be fully vaccinated as a condition of employment, and they have to submit proof of vaccination by January 14. Those who haven't complied by next week will be put on unpaid leave, with their last day of employment being January 31. BMW took the crown as the best-selling luxury brand in the world after selling out Mercedes-Benz for the first time in 5 years. BMW sold a record 2.2 million cars a year, while Mercedes fell 5% to 2.05 million units. BMW officially ended 2021 as the best-selling manufacturer of luxury cars in the United States. From January to December last year, BMW sold more than 300,000 cars in the United States. This was a gain of 21% over the weak sales recorded in 2020, and in line with the sales of 2019.
Usually glamorous event that marked the start of Hollywood's war season was relegated to live blog with no red carpets, TV shows or stars. The Hollywood Foreign Press Association continued its film award show that Sunday night without televised nominations, red carpets, host, media or even live broadcast. Steven Spielberg's West Side Story won multiple awards, including Best Comedy or Musical, Best Actress for Rachel Zegler, and Best Supporting Actress for Ariana DeBose. Netflix's growth Western Dog Power was named Best Drama, and Jane Campani's director and Cody Smith Macbee's supporting role also took home 2 honors. Other films winners including Will Smith, Richard King, Nicole Kidman becoming Ricardo, and the South Korean actor Oh Young-soo won the country's first Golden Globe for playing players 011, or let me say WO, in Netflix hit game Squid. To sport now, Galatasaray ended up the contract with the veteran coach Fatih Terim, culminating his 4th spell with the club that led the UEFA Cup title in 2000. The 68-year-old Terim lives with the team in the knockout round of the Europa League's Galatasaray in the 12th place in the 20-team Turkish league after a 1-0 home loss against Gaziantep. Galatasaray President Burak Yılmaz announced the firing while noting Terim achieved success in Europe this season. That Marcus Hughes allows proud, although Terim team finished first in Europa League and advanced to the second round of the tournament. And on the other side, Algerian international player Sofiane Feghouli posted a tweet as farewell to his coach saying, "It was a pleasure working with you, coach." Ladies and gentlemen, let's have a reminder for our main stories. Kazakhstan President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, who requested help from Russia last week after claiming the protests were a coup d'etat, said on Tuesday that Moscow-led military mission was complete and contingent would leave the country within 10 days. US and Russian officials held over 7 hours of talks on Monday, but the two sides did not negotiate or appear any closer to resolution over highlighted fears that Russia will attack its neighbor Ukraine. The United Nations said Tuesday it needed $5 billion in aid for Afghanistan in 2022 and avert humanitarian catastrophe and offer ravaged country a future after 40 years of suffering. U.S. hospitalization break record as Omicron surge. U.S. insurers must cover 8 at-home tests each month. Biden administration says Chicago's public schools canceled Monday's classes. That's all for now. Wishing the best of luck for our national football team in his first game to defend the African title. See you at 6 with the better info and more over the latest. Bye bye.